This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, nononsenseforex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 177 is brought to us by Bybit. Holy cow, did trading go berserk this past week. And I think it's because people know that crypto is officially back. Now, short term, are we going to see a retracement? Who knows? We certainly might. That would be awfully contrarian. But regardless of which direction we go, you can earn the thing that is probably the future of money simply by trading crypto and by doing it on one of the top trading sites in the world that gives you so much back. Go down to the show notes. Click on the Bybit link to the blog. Read it. Click my affiliate link at the bottom and get yourself started. Get in this ecosystem. There's so much out there that Bybit will give you simply by being there. Because with Bybit membership, has its rewards. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian podcast, and you're going to hear some noise probably in the background too. I have no idea what my microphone picks up or what it doesn't. But Latin America is a noisy place sometimes. But just so everybody knows, this is a continuation of a lot of what we've been talking about for the past 2 months. You know, getting ourselves ready for a world to where we've already made a lot of our money through asymmetrical investing, through contrarian investing, and what to do next. We're still in that series. We got briefly interrupted by the election episode, but we are officially back. And the main lesson I want to pass off here, it's going to take a long way to get there, so stay with me. Now, you might have seen through the title of this episode is we're going to talk about some uncomfortable truths out there. Now, they're not uncomfortable for everybody, but you guys know how we do things here in contrarian land. We take things that most people think and believe and try to show that the opposite is actually true, and we need to act accordingly. And the cool thing is that even if we're wrong, it doesn't hurt us a whole lot, and we can still do pretty well. You know, it's not an either-or thing. It's not a zero-sum game. You know, but we've done pretty well here on the podcast, and one of the big reasons why is, you know, we're willing to deal with uncomfortable truths when it comes to the current narrative. And we see it all over the place, and we've seen a lot of it just this past week. You know, I'll go over some examples. And the first one is obviously the Trump landslide victory that we've just seen. I'd outlined my case for a Trump victory last week in the election episode, but I didn't think it was going to be that much. I thought it was still going to be close. There was going to be some controversy, but oh no, there was not. And there was a lot of people in this country and a lot of people around the world that were really, really surprised by it. But as I said in that episode too, I don't think they should have been. There were some very uncomfortable truths that side needed to deal with. First of all, the Harris campaign was probably the worst campaign I've ever seen run. You know, from how she got there in the first place, to the platforms they were running on, to the people she had decided to surround herself with, or whoever's decision that was. Probably wasn't even hers. You know, it just fell really flat, and it didn't compel a lot of people on that side to get out and enthusiastically vote. And that campaign needed to be an absolute home run. Because as I had stated before as well, and I think, you know, trying to be on both sides and really kind of seek for the right answer at the end of the day because our money depends on it, kind of helped me out here. But I did see that really almost everything the Biden administration did was very unpopular. Unless you were already deep over to that side, to where you're just going to support everything they do no matter what it is, was very unpopular. And even when the media had to come out and admit, you know, that they were duping people into believing that Biden was completely cognizant and sane, you know, they had to eat that one, and they really let a lot of their own constituents down, to where even those people were starting to question things. You know, once you factor all that in, this should not have been a surprise at all, yet it was to a lot of people, but they had to face reality for the first time in a long time. And regardless of which side you're on, if you're super all the way gaga over to one side, it's not helping you any, regardless if your side's winning or not. You know, there are uncomfortable truths out there, And you need to be aware of them before they hit you in the face, especially in the investing world. And now moving on to things that are a bit more relevant to us. This past week, two people I talk about a lot on this podcast, Raoul Paul and Peter Zion. They got together and they had a chat, and it was glorious. And I'll tell you why. Now, first off, I want to reiterate what I've said in the past about some of the people I talk about on this show and how you need to approach them. These people sometimes get bad reputations, and the people who give these more prominent speakers bad reputations are not very bright. All right, so it's the whole thing I've said with Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff got Bitcoin wrong. Okay. Peter Schiff also got just about everything else right. And if you dismiss Peter Schiff because of the one thing he got wrong, well, then you're going to be in the dark about a lot of things, and you're also not going to you're probably going to just dismiss gold because Peter loves gold, and you're not going to be able to partake in the benefits of one of the best investments of all time. The single best defensive investment ever created that also goes up a lot. I couldn't imagine a world where I didn't have some gold in my holdings somewhere. But people are dumb, and they make that mistake. You know, Gary Vee, who I've talked about on the channel many times, had an NFT project that didn't go well, or hasn't gone well so far. So now people are calling him a scammer. And they're just dismissing him and everything he's going to say and everything he has said in the past. I'm like, you guys are mush-brained beyond belief. That's not how you approach something. You know, I think people, especially in the financial world, you know, especially in Forex and crypto and things like that, they're just so conditioned to expect everybody to be a scammer at the end of the day, because they're, you know, rightfully so, there have been so many in those industries that they're just so ready to completely dismiss anybody who gets a prediction wrong or has a project that fails, or maybe that person latched on to somebody else who was an actual scammer. You know, it's like you're not allowed to make any mistakes. You have to have a spotless record all the time, or these people just aren't going to respect you. And I'm telling you, this is a child's approach. The right way is to recognize these people for their strengths and then simply dismiss them when they start talking about things that are not in their wheelhouse. And if they make a mistake or a bad prediction, that's okay, because we all do. You know, if you have the balls to put yourself out there on a global scale, which most people don't have, then you are going to be wrong about some things. But anyway, I digress. Raoul and Peter are two of those people for sure who have been famously wrong about certain things. But when they stick to what they know, for the most part, it can be quite good. Now, Raoul right now is really, really hyper bullish on AI. And he has even set time horizons for what he thinks is going to happen with AI and how it's going to shape our future. And now I listen to Raoul a lot, and every time I hear him talk about this, I remember what Peter said. And Peter is very realistic about this, and he's like, look, most people don't realize this, but here's a very uncomfortable truth about AI. It takes materials and inputs and supply chains, which are the most complicated supply chains in the world, just to put these things out. And he's referring mainly to semiconductors and the type you will need for this AI revolution. He's like, if you think these things are coming out at scale anytime soon, you are heavily, heavily mistaken. It's just not realistic. And, you know, in listening to Raoul talk about AI, I can tell that he is not aware of this. But by the grace of God, we saw the two of them come together this past week. I will link this interview down below in the show notes. I think everybody should listen to it, where Raoul got an absolute reality check. And through it all, you know, you could tell it was a very uncomfortable truth that he had to deal with on the spot. I credit him for even putting this interview out in the first place. But he was still so dogmatic and still so far over to one side. He still kept saying, well, I still believe it's going to happen. And you could tell Peter was just over there like, he didn't say it out loud, but he's like, why? What the fuck? I just told you it physically can't happen at the rate you're preaching over here. And, you know, the common thread running through all of these uncomfortable truths is that when we have these biases, part of our heart goes with it, whether we want it to or not. You know, with politics, with something we are hyper bullish on, you know, with something we genuinely want to succeed. And this can cause blind spots. For example, back in 2021, I was hyper bullish on the metaverse. In 2024, I still am. Problem is, I was still way too early. There's just no getting around it. I said before that I don't have any regrets really of getting in as early as I did. Monetarily, it wasn't the best thing because 4 out of 5 times I could have gotten cheaper prices had I waited. But I got into those communities, and it's just been like non-monetarily, it's been a great experience watching these things develop and getting to know the people inside those communities. So there's no real regret from that standpoint, but price-wise, I could have gotten in a lot cheaper in a lot of different areas. And the reason why this occurred, the reason why I went into something so heavily, not even remembering the whole boom-bust echo phenomenon that we talk about a lot here on the show, is that I didn't have that one person telling me that one uncomfortable truth that, yes, VP, crypto is a fantastic technology. It is part of the future of computing and gaming, but it is not a GPU. These things take time to create. You're still looking at about a 4 to 5 year time horizon with a lot of these projects, because just because crypto exists does not mean it speeds up the development time. If anything, it might slow it down because it's a brand new technology that they have to figure out how to weave into these games and open world metaverse projects. I didn't have anybody there to tell me that. I had to figure this out on my own, the hard way. So this is why we try to do our best here to deal with and tackle these uncomfortable truths, because whether we like them or not, and we normally don't like them, that's why they are uncomfortable truths, is they still exist and they still factor in greatly to the future of the investments that we're looking at, whether they're normie investments, contrarian investments, speculative investments, whatever it is, we have to deal with the truths that are there, not this fantasy world that we're trying to create. So over 12 minutes in, this is my long and drawn out way to get to a point that isn't even a direct tie to what I've just been talking about. But I hope you guys understand and empathize with me. It's 177 podcast episodes in, guys. I do my best here. But we have been talking about, when you run your monthly chart and you see opportunities coming, you're probably going to get a lot of them. And how do you narrow them down to the absolute best choices possible? And we've talked about that from a fundamental aspect, and we've also talked about narrowing it down by sector. Now, there's another way you can narrow it down too, and it's a little more zoomed out, a bit more holistic, but it is something that is very important because there are going to be narratives to the contrary, I guarantee you, when the time comes. And that is going to be where a lot of these companies are going to be located. And if you understand geopolitics even a little bit, you should be able to narrow this down pretty well and be able to ignore a lot of these emerging market narratives that are going to come about. Because emerging markets is a buzzword, and it gets clicks, and it gets views, and people are excited because they think they're getting in really early to these brand new frontier markets. When, in my opinion, and I'm trying to predict the future here, as we all are, but in my opinion, I don't think you're going to really need to go far to get the best investments. I think the best opportunities, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, are going to be in the United States. Even if we don't have a huge crash in the markets, there are a lot of places right now that just aren't doing very well. Deglobalization is a very real thing. Looming depopulation is a real thing. And it's already affecting a lot of major players across the world. Imagine how much it would be exacerbated if we had a big financial meltdown. But again, even if we don't, you need to invest in those places that are primed to really take off. And the United States is fully equipped to be the number one nation in this race. By far. It has all the energy. And whatever energy it doesn't have, it's going to get from Canada and Mexico. It's going to have zero problems with labor. We've spoken about this before. Peter Zion says it's going to have to double its industrial capacity, and we now have the administration that is promoting this, who has always promoted this. And now they have the House and the Senate behind them. The United States, by far, has the clearest path to success compared to any other country in the entire world. Now, we've spoken on this podcast as well about some other areas that are really worth looking at, but these areas are harder to invest in for your average person, no matter where you are in the world, unless you're right up against these countries or inside of these countries. We've spoken about India, and if you listen to the podcast interview that I'm linking down below, Peter says something really interesting, and this is true. India doesn't do a lot of business with the rest of the world. A lot of things going on in India are for India, which is fine. We're talking about 1.5 billion people there. But if you were going to get into India super early, that time has probably passed. The future is bright there. But at the same time, there's a lot of stocks that you're not going to be able to invest in. And the same goes for another area I'm quite bullish on. That's going to be Southeast Asia. Do you have access to the Indonesian stock market? There might be one or two ETFs out there that will give you access, but those are probably in the United States. And do you all have access to those? Another place I've been quite bullish on, and we had a whole dedicated episode on this podcast, and that's Australia. More so if we go through a big crash and a fallout, and then everybody needs to rebuild, because Australia is where a lot of your energy and materials are going to come from. And this is why also I tweeted this out. The Aussie dollar does extremely well during recoveries, so certainly look out for that. We will mention this again when the time comes, if this podcast is still around by then. But those are the places I think are the most exciting. Every other place in the world is not named Latin America, but it's a hard place to invest in. So I almost don't count it at this point. But look at your major players. Europe is dying, like we've been saying. The European Union is not a great place to be right now. Germany especially is not a great place to be right now as far as the future goes. And China, as we predicted too, is dealing with their own demons on probably a higher scale than we realize. Japan is still going through what Japan has been going through. And if anybody wants to sit there and try to bottom Africa while all this is going on, be my guest. Maybe places like Saudi Arabia are really coming out of this well. I would agree with that. But again, not an easy place to get your money into. The easiest and best place to invest, in my opinion, in the next 5, possibly 10 years, is going to be the United States. I get shit sometimes because I'm from the United States, and people think I have a super bias towards it. It's like, no, man. Look, things just are what they are. And if the correct answer was a place like Russia, who's been the mortal enemy of the United States ever since I've been alive, well, then that's where I'm going to look. I said a long time ago in a video on YouTube that that's where the overall balance of power and money is shifting. And that has been what has been going on. But I do think now it's probably about to shift the other way. North America is going to be a really good place to be, contrarians, as far as your money goes. And as far as living. North America, Latin America, if you're not in these areas already, you are going to want to make sure you get access to these places any way possible. We've talked about, if you have to get an ITIN number, even if that involves traveling to the United States to do, I don't know the process for this, but if you have to come to the States to do it, then so what? Just do it. My 10-minute contrarian audience is not my Forex audience. You guys are not broke. You can do this if you have to. Back in 2018, 2019, I can't remember which year it was, but I was becoming financially free, but I still wasn't to the point where I could drop a bunch of money on a trip, but I still went all the way from the United States to Georgia and Armenia simply to open up remote bank accounts, because at the time, in my mind, that was the only place you could really do it as an American, and I wanted to make sure I had that coverage. And so I got up off my ass and did it. And I have zero regrets. It was a wonderful trip. I got to see some really great countries. Georgia's awesome. Armenia's awesome. I got to see Ukraine, which was also awesome. And I had the chance to put my money into 2 currencies that have outperformed the dollar ever since I was there. And now I have those tunnels open should I ever need to use them. Absolutely zero regrets. It just takes getting over some of those initial fears and making the move. And then one other thing to tie it all back to what we talk about a lot here on the show. Towards the end of this interview between Raoul and Peter talked about Germany and how it's not going to be a pleasant place to be, most likely, going forward. And Raoul's like, well, what do you do if you're in Germany? And Peter said, well, you get a visa. And Raoul said, Raoul's just so blown away by all this. He's like, well, where should they move? United States is not letting a lot of people in. Maybe Canada? And then Peter's like, no, Canada's actually shutting their doors too. And Raoul's like, oh, what, Latin America? And I'm over here like, yes, Latin America. Get your goddamn visa. There are still really great opportunities that will not be around at this level in the future. I promise you. Mexico, Paraguay, even Panama is not as hard as I thought it was. There are still ways in that don't involve huge investment. These are places that are not only good places to live, but you still don't even have to live there. You can go back to Germany or wherever you're from and just simply have this option and flexibility that most of the world doesn't have and are probably going to wish they had at some point. But the majority of you sit there and do nothing when it comes to this. And the reasons you're telling yourself aren't even true. I just heard somebody say it the other day, somebody from the U.S., like, well, I don't want to have to live in Mexico for X amount of days just to keep my visa. I'm like, you don't have to do that at all. Who told you did? And they were like, well, nobody. I just thought that's how. No, you thought wrong. People are just so aggressively uneducated on stuff like this. And it's why they don't take action. Well, I take that back. No, scratch that. The real reason why people don't take action is fear. They just use this lack of education on the topic as a very comfortable blankie they can wrap themselves in to justify being too fearful to make a move that they probably know deep down is going to be a good move. Again, if I don't use these banks for anything, or if I don't use half the visas I have, the residencies, that's fine. I have zero regrets for going out and giving myself flexibility and optionality. If you live in the West and you have a Western job, if it's a money thing, rest easy. The money is probably going to come back. But don't think just because we had a Trump victory in the presidency that there is no need to prep anymore. That's absurd. And none of the reasons we were even really talking about as far as reasons to prep financially had anything to do with the Biden administration. All of the reasons we have are completely independent of United States politics. Don't forget that. But when looking to the future as far as your investments go, once it's time to do so, despite your feelings on the United States, and if you really wish that the opportunity was somewhere else, that doesn't mean that it is. Now again, I could be wrong, certainly been wrong before, but on this one, I really don't think I'm wrong. And if you want to go do the research and add it all up, I think you're going to see the same thing I'm saying. But in a way, that's good. It's an easy financial ecosystem to get into, even if you don't live there. It just might take a few extra steps. And the people I have in my head when I'm saying all this are Europeans. Europeans, I'm mainly talking to you. You can sit there and go down with the ship if you want to. Most Europeans will, because that's just how they are programmed. And I am not rooting for the collapse of the European Union or Europe in general. All I know is that if I live there, I would want to have a way out just in case. And I would want access to the largest and most robust financial market in the world, which is the United States. Because if you wanted to, you could. A lot of Europeans already do. It just takes a little bit of work. So take action. Because in a lot of countries outside of the United States, taking steps like this to your average person who lives in these countries is going to seem crazy. I get it. But when those ships start to sink and everybody is still on the ship trying to complain their way out of it, you're going to be really glad you were early.